Hello and welcome to On the Record. I'm your host Adam Jasa. After his summit with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, President Donald Trump saw the end of war in Ukraine within his grasp. 3 weeks on, Russian bombs keep falling on Ukrainian cities, while Putin is celebrated by American foes led by China. Have we reached a point where Trump will finally get tough with Russia? Or is he going to offer Ukraine and Europe to the dragon bear on a plate? I go on the record with this question with Justyna Gotkowska, Deputy Director at the Center for Eastern Studies in Warsaw. But first, a short update on where we stand.
From this,
you're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
to this. It took Donald Trump a few months to figure out who's who in the war between Ukraine and Russia.
Putin really surprised a lot of people. He talks nice and then he bombs everybody in the evening. So there's a little bit of a problem there, and I don't like it.
Eager to bring peace and perhaps a Nobel Prize to his shelf, the US president cast himself as the ultimate mediator. He has little to show for his efforts after rolling out the red carpet for Putin in Alaska last month. Despite token concessions, the Kremlin strongman has again delivered demands that, for Ukraine, amount to little more than surrender. For all the assurances from J.D. Vance, the US vice president, that Russia had given up on seeking regime change in Kyiv, Putin returned to his fanciful claim that the Ukrainian government has been illegal during his meeting with Xi Jinping in China. Such sounds and such images, these remain part of everyday life in Ukraine. And while global leaders are unequivocal,
Russia, the predator, has to be held accountable for what it did and has to pay.
neither is President Zelensky under any illusions.
What is needed is a clear response from the world to this evil. There are no deadlines that Putin won't break. There are no diplomatic possibilities that Russia won't ruin. We need decisive action.
Zelensky has outlined 3 pillars that should underpin any credible security guarantees for Ukraine. Strengthening Ukraine's armed forces, deepening international partnership, and maintaining tough sanctions on Russia remain essential for any lasting peace. Meanwhile, a new round of diplomatic consultations is scheduled for September 4th in Paris.
Justyna, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, President Trump expressed his outrage, if you will, that China is hosting a conspiracy meeting in China with Putin and Kim of North Korea. And to me, it's like, are you really that surprised, Mr. President? Where have you been for the past few years? What would you say to that?
Well, I think that we got used to Trump saying different things, controversial things or surprising things. So his saying is not surprising. He applies pressure and he offers cooperation almost at the same time. With regard to the meeting in China, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, this meeting is one of, has been repeated in the past years as well. It has gathered a similar bunch of group of leaders.
But this year it got an extra significance, right?
It got an extra significance due to the presence of Prime Minister Modi, exactly. Because it was somehow a sign of dissatisfaction with US policies towards India, US lifting tariffs towards India, and it was...
You mean raising tariffs?
Raising tariffs vis-à-vis India, and hence in the US eyes it was actually a meeting of leaders who are working against the US.
You know, I've been talking to a number of analysts, both economic and political, and they've always been saying that BRICS is a bit of an artificial concept. Yes, they meet, yes, they talk, but at the end of the day, in practical terms, it doesn't mean much. But I cannot resist the temptation to actually say that Trump did everything to make it real.
to make it a demonstration to the world that US policies, as Trump administration does them, are sometimes too controversial, are sometimes made in a way that alienate partners like India, that one would like to draw closer to the US, partners that are somehow in between these blocks, meaning on one hand the US and on the other hand Russia and China. And this meeting was somehow significant due to the case of India.
Right, and of course we cannot forget about the context of Ukraine, because this is the central issue for Europe and for Poland, for our region. So, in your opinion, after these months of diplomacy, after these, as you said, mixed signals, threats, and then enticements, if you will, where do we stand? Have we made any progress on peace, or are we back to square one?
I think we are back to square one, actually, because after months of negotiations, we are in a situation where we were before. Ukraine will not give up. Russia wants still to have everything. It raises its maximalist goals. It doesn't even want to recognize Zelensky as a president, as Ukraine.
Putin just said it in China.
Exactly, and hence he will not meet President Zelensky. And this was actually envisaged as a next step of peace negotiation in the Trump mind.
Again, I just can't help thinking this really damages the US administration's credibility, because Vice President J.D. Vance 3 days ago went on television and said, you know, Putin gave up his maximalist agenda. He doesn't want regime change in Kiev. He accepts European presence on the front line. And then this happens and it's like...
You may ask yourself, or we may ask ourselves, why does it come? Why such statements come from the vice presidents? Because they are not true, as we hear from Putin. Putin wants the annexation, the recognition of the annexation of the Ukrainian regions. He wants a regime change. He wants a disarmament, actually, of Ukraine. He doesn't want Ukraine's integration with the EU, with NATO, and he doesn't want Western military force in Ukraine guarding or safeguarding peace. So we hear that from Putin, and we hear different things from the US administration. We can ask ourselves why and where does that come from? And there are some theories saying that the special envoy of the president, Steve Witkoff, has been misled or misunderstood the Russians, and now some parts of the Trump administration repeat his message, which does not reflect the reality.
You know, I'm the first one to pin the blame on Mr. Witkoff, because I think he's inexperienced, and he was, you know, he took part in these Kremlin charades where he obviously was outgunned. But at the end of the day, President Trump arranged a meeting with Putin in Alaska precisely to get to the bottom of things, right? And allegedly, he says he did.
Well, I don't think this meeting went that well, because as you need to have noticed that there was it was shorter than planned, the visit. Trump, of course, sounded quite successful, that it was a successful meeting during the press conference, but he actually gained nothing from Putin, and he needs concessions from Russia in order to have some serious negotiations with Russian maximalist goals. The US administration will have none, and hence we are in square zero. Russia wants things that we cannot accept and Ukraine cannot accept. Ukraine cannot accept Russian demands, and hence the war will continue. We need to further support Ukraine. We need to keep the US on board, and this is the same game that we have for months now. Who is to blame for the failed negotiations? Is it Russia or is it Ukraine? And I think both sides try to convince Putin that it's the other side.
Convince Donald Trump.
Donald Trump,
right.
Donald Trump.
Yes, and you know, the real question is, has Europe played their cards wisely in all this? Because initially there was a lot of concern that the US and Europe will completely fall apart on this issue. And, you know, there's a lot of criticism of European leaders that they sort of pretended they didn't see or understand and were sort of complimentary towards Mr. Trump and saying, yes, you're absolutely right and all of this, and we're all with you. But at the end of the day, they can probably now say, well, look, we were right.
I think that European leaders played a positive role. We can, of course, criticize them for sort of appeasing Trump publicly. But I think they came to Washington with a united message. Not all of their message and arguments came through to the Trump administration. But after the Putin-Trump meeting in Alaska, we thought that the meeting between Trump and Zelensky in Washington might be disastrous. And it wasn't. It was actually, one can say, a tactical Ukrainian success because the discussions were focused on security guarantees for Ukraine, on certain limitations of what can be given up, what cannot. And Ukraine wasn't pressed wasn't pressured by the US during these discussions.
But does that mean that Donald Trump, you know, will finally deliver on this threat that he will take a more decisive action? He threatened sanctions, secondary sanctions. He did it to India, but not to China and not to others, not to Russia directly. Do you think we have reached a point where he's ready to do that? Or is he going to keep a little bit ambivalent about this and let the Europeans do the job?
And this is a very good question, I think, that everyone asks.
Which means it's not a good question if you say that.
And we simply don't know. Okay. We simply don't know. We know that President Trump is very cautious about applying additional economic and military pressure on Russia. But he reached a dead end in the negotiation. So that would be a logical step from the European and Ukrainian perspective. But whether he will do that, I cannot tell. He might do that, but equally he might simply back down from the negotiations and say that he did the utmost. It's now the part of Putin and Zelensky to meet. If they do not are not willing to do so. I'm out of it, I stay out of it, but I would expect that the US would keep the intelligence sharing with Ukraine, that the US would keep the supply of weapons and military equipment for Ukraine paid by the Europeans and paid by Ukraine. So I see these two possible directions. There is, of course, a third one, that Trump will start to lift sanctions on Russia and start to somehow get go back, at least partly, to business as usual.
I think that is one option, but I think your option two is probably a little bit more likely, because if there's one thing in which Trump is consistent, is that he doesn't want to drag America into more wars. So I'm just wondering if somewhere there at the end of the day is not that he is recognizing the limits of American power. And that therefore he's saying the Europeans need to do the heavy lifting. He got that. He's not going to back away completely, just as you said a moment ago, but he's not going to risk America being dragged into a proper conflict with Russia.
I don't think that it's about the limits of American power, because the Trump administration would have the instruments and means to pressure Russia, but it doesn't want to. It doesn't want to because it has fears about engaging much to a larger extent in managing the conflict in Europe, and it wants to prevent it. It wants to focus on the Indo-Pacific, on China. We need to have in mind that...
But that focus on China, forgive me for interrupting you, you know, Trump is inconsistent on China as well.
True.
And you know, some analysts are saying that he's basically quitting Asia and quitting allies also in the Pacific. So he's more sort of focused on America, on the Arctic, and he has a minimalist agenda.
I think this administration sends mixed messages because you have also different groupings inside the administration. And of course, you have people that still try to convince the president so that we need to engage much more in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, there is a fraction, America first, and we need to focus on our continent. But there is a faction that says that we need to redirect military presence, military focus on the Indo-Pacific. And we will see that in the incoming national security and defense strategy. That will be published in autumn, along with the global force posture review, meaning how the military presence of the US in the world will look like. And that will tell us a lot in which direction the security and defense policy of the US will go.
Is Europe doing enough on helping Ukraine and on rearming itself?
Europe has been gradually doing more and more, but a lot will need to be done additionally, and we need to simply speed up. We need to speed up with rearming or arming Ukraine, rearming ourselves, and work on the pace our arms industry is producing military equipment. And here...
But is it happening?
I think the speed has accelerated of the changes. We had the Hague summit. All the allies committed to 5% of GDP.
Commitments on paper.
Yes, but we see, for example, look at Germany. German defense budget is increasing. Look at France. We will have next week the decision whether this government, the current French government, will stay or not, because the defense spending has been raised and social cuts are being planned. So we see that biggest European countries are moving. And we see, of course, our region, Northern Europe, Central Europe, we are spending much, much more on defense.
But at the same time, everywhere across Europe, in Poland, in Czech Republic, in Hungary, obviously, but also in France, you mentioned the vote of confidence in the French government, but also in Germany, we see parties that are not necessarily convinced that this effort is needed, still very popular, and, in some cases they may be on the threshold of power. How big a risk is that?
Of course we do. We need to do the leaders of these countries, the parties in power, the political elites who are convinced that we are in a crucial time in Europe with regard to European security architecture, need to do their job, need to lead in convincing the population that...
So who delivers the best message on that now among the European leaders?
I think that Macron is doing, after his change in perceiving Russia, in perceiving also how NATO should function, in coming back to collective defense, is doing his job in France, but we have a difficult domestic situation in the country. I think that Merz is increasingly
the German Chancellor
doing his job, but of course he has quite powerful opponents in the parliament, AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, and the leftist party, but both the Chancellor, the Defense Minister and the Foreign Minister are trying to do their job. I would expect them to do more, but I think overall Europe is moving in the right direction. With the question marks you mentioned, that we will see how this message comes through in the societies, what will be the outcome of the next parliamentary elections in the biggest European countries, but also in our region. And we need to be wary, we need to be better in communicating to our societies where we are and what is needed.
There is also always a question about leadership in Europe, right? I mean, every conference starts with that, either absence of leadership or candidates to lead Europe. You mentioned two of them. Ursula von der Leyen occasionally tries to be the leader, but then it turns out that some of her statements are then corrected by some of these other leaders. We saw an example of that this week when she talked about troops on the ground and stood corrected by the German defense minister, Mr. Pistorius. But there's the third leader, also the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. So my question to you is Europe going back to some kind of a format where it's Britain, Germany, and France that really provide the so-called E3, providing leadership in Europe?
These countries are, of course, important, the biggest ones, in terms of military and economic political potential. But I think that what has emerged out of these negotiations, or how the Europeans managed Trump administration, is the E5 format, meaning that this E3 group, France, Germany, the UK, has been joined by Italy and also Poland, and then representatives of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and of the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, and additionally representative from the Nordic countries, recently Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland.
As a Polish analyst, aren't you a little jealous that the Finnish president and Finland in general seems to be overtaking Poland as a player in some of these diplomatic games?
I think that Trump has this tendency to forge closer relationships with people he likes.
And trust.
And I'm not sure whether trust. He likes. And I think President Stubb of Finland
but they lack fire and water.
Has tried very much to play golf well with President Trump. And I think that...
But they're completely different.
Yes,
one
but
is
I
a
think
sort of Nordic, steady, reasonable...
Successful. And I think he found a way to speak to Trump in the right way. And let's see how the visit of the Polish president will go in Washington, and whether the two presidents will find a way of forging a closer
But maybe one difference between Finland and Poland is that in Finland, basically everyone speaks the same language on foreign policy, and in Poland we increasingly see divergence. It's not just formal about who is in charge of what, but it's also on policy. There are differences. You know, Mr. Nawrocki's skepticism about Europe is well known and documented. So
yes, but
could this be the reason why Poland, that perhaps Poland's partners are these days a little confused about where Poland is heading?
Yes, but in spite of this domestic differences, sometimes infighting, I think that all major parties and actors in Poland share the same goals with regard to what the US shall do.
So the political noise is one thing, but then
yes, and I think that it's an interest of all, and in general, an interest of Poland, that US applies more pressure on Russia and further supports Ukraine. And I think this is outside of the debate. And second, that the US stays militarily and politically in Europe.
Last question.
These are the two messages that I think everyone from Poland will send.
Last question. Should Poland, under the right circumstances, contribute to that military force in Ukraine, if it happens?
I think Poland gave its answer, that Poland...
Yeah, I know, but in your opinion, as an analyst?
I think that the logistical support that Poland will give to such a mission, that I don't believe will take place anytime soon, because there will be no ceasefire and no peace agreement and in a foreseeable future, that this role of a logistic hub for Poland will be very demanding. And Poland will need to apply resources, financial, human resources, to do this job in the best way possible.
So that contribution will be real.
And that contribution, I think, will be valued by partners, as it is now in terms of support, military supporting Ukraine. This is a huge effort, and I think it also consumes a lot of finances and a lot of human resources on part of Poland.
Justyna Gotkowska, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. This was On the Record. See you next week.